What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got out of seeing The Flash on the largest IMAX screen in the country and wanted to offer a quick review. And I'm going to break up my review into two parts because all the spoilers have been out there for weeks at this point. There have been so many fan screenings, and even the director has been offering spoilers on social media. But I'm going to avoid all spoilers. Anything that you can't see in the trailer, I will avoid all of that until a certain point in my video, and I'm going to leave a little time code down in the description below, and I'll offer you a big warning before I get into spoiler terrain. But I can't properly praise this movie's best scene without going into specifics, but for now we're going to keep things nice and broad, nice and general. But before I go any further, let me just say that for all the people out there who are saying that this is the best superhero movie ever made, even if they really mean it, you're doing the movie no favors, because not only is it not the best superhero movie ever made, I don't even think it's the best superhero movie released this year. However, the last 30 to 45 minutes are fucking glorious. I mean, maybe the most comic book adaptation that I've ever seen is featured toward the end of the flick. I mean, if you've ever read a comic book that featured a large, glorious battle with a lot going on, you are going to be absolutely thrilled and delighted right down to your taste buds with the final scene. However, to get there, you have to endure what is a pretty long movie. The running time of this flick is 2 hours and 24 minutes, and about an hour and 15 of that is Ezra Miller acting opposite Ezra Miller being silly. And if you're a massive Ezra Miller fan, I'm sure all those sequences where he's just being silly and kind of playing off of himself will be absolutely delightful. But if you find him to be shrill or grating or obnoxious, well, then it's going to be unendurable. And so I will be watching The Flash again down the road, but I'll basically be watching the first 10 minutes where he teams up with Batman, Batfleck, and Alfred, and that sort of thing in the regular DC Extended Universe. And then I'm going to fast forward to the part where Michael Keaton shows up, because once Michael Keaton shows up or Bruce Wayne shows up, the movie starts to get really good, and he's lost none of his chops. He hasn't lost a step. He's just a terrific performer. But then once Batman shows up, it starts to get real good. And then when Kara Zor-El shows up, it gets a little bit better. And then by the end, where you got Kara and Batman and Barry going into battle side by side against General Zod and all of his minions, yeah, it's fucking awesome. There's no getting around it. And DC movies in general tend to be front-loaded with all the DC lunatics, all the DC fanatics, and there was an absolutely, completely, totally sold-out screening. And I would say there was scattered applause pretty consistently throughout most of the movie. Anytime a big character would make an entrance or do something cool, or one of the major spoiler events would happen toward the end, people would get into it. But I also noticed a lot of people were on their phones, and that's pretty normal in New York. I mean, I'm a bit of a psycho. For me, if you pull out a phone during a movie, I feel like you should have your phone smashed in front of you and maybe have your finger stepped on. I have a zero tolerance policy for phones in any way, shape, or form, but I'm a realist when it comes to going to see movies in New York, because everybody feels like the theater belongs to them and they can do whatever they like. But it seemed like there were a lot of people screwing around on their phones during the flick, not just checking to see what time it was, but scrolling through dog pictures or answering emails or taking selfies or picking their butt, you name it, they were doing it on their phones. And if a bunch of DC fanatics and nerds on opening night are distracted and screwing around with their phones, I would expect most people, IMAX tickets, they're expensive. People would want to get their money's worth out of the experience. But if they're basically killing time and waiting for Batman to show up, I think I need to cut my projections in half for how well this movie is going to do, because I've been saying for months I thought that this movie was going to be one of the few movies this year that would gross $1 billion worldwide. I'm going to change that now to 500 million, because I think everybody's going to be in total agreement that the ending completely, totally kicks ass. I think the audience is going to be divided on the first half of the movie. So let's talk about the good and the bad of Ezra's performance, because I feel like this movie leans into Ezra's best and worst qualities. Ezra's interactions with Kara Zor-El are so goddamn good. I mean, you get a little taste of it in the trailer when he acknowledges that her symbol stands for hope. When Ezra gets sincere and goes for heartfelt emotion, they absolutely are capable of delivering a fantastic performance. And who knows, maybe Andy Muschietti, the director, was encouraging Ezra to kind of lean into all these stupid antics. But for my money, I've never been down with the way Ezra Miller depicts Barry Allen while running. I feel like hire a trainer, go to a track, and learn to sprint. But the whole stupid waving the arms thing and that exaggerated form, it doesn't make like the character look cool or that the Flash is running really quickly. It just makes the Flash look like a big wet noodle. And for me, the Flash should be the most badass sprinter that has ever existed, and the character should be portrayed accordingly on the screen. And early on, there's a major action sequence where the Flash is having to do a hell of a lot of things at one time. So it compounds the problem. The Flash is moving in that really, really silly kind of noodle way, but at the same time, surrounded by all these really kind of rubbery, bubblegum looking special effects. Like, I was blown away by just how poor the special effects were and during many sequences, especially during the time travel sequences. And you can tell they're going for a very specific look that's not entirely realistic, but I mean, at one point I was like, this looks like a video game from the late 90s. Like, what the hell is going on here? But for a movie that's been in post-production for like the last half decade, I was expecting the best goddamn special effects that human beings have ever seen. But in the final analysis, I think that Ezra Miller was horribly miscast as Barry Allen years ago. Like, Ezra Miller would have made a great Wally West as a sidekick to Barry Allen. I mean, honestly, if I could get my ideal Barry Allen, I would take Robert Redford from the 60s, because people forget that Barry Allen in the 60s was like a square-jawed, tall, like respectable cop. He wasn't like kind of a countercultural figure. He wasn't young. He wasn't a total fuck up and that sort of thing. Ezra Miller would have been a fantastic Wally West. Barry Allen, maybe I'm just too much of a stickler for like my early impressions of the Flash, but if Ezra Miller never plays the part of the Flash again, I will have no problem with that. But you would have to have a very cold, dead heart not to enjoy yourself once Michael Keaton shows up as Batman. I mean, Batman agrees to help out until they can find Kal-El, who turns out to be Kara Zor-El. But goddamn, like, the movie just keeps escalating and kind of like building and building, and it turns into this giant crescendo. And I'm about to get to my spoiler section, but not quite there yet. But all I'll say is that there's some scenes with Batman and Kara Zor-El in the last like 10, 20 minutes. You're like, oh my God, like, I can't believe they went there, but like, bravo for having the courage to do so. And Andy Muschietti, his style is a little funky, where he's not trying to go for like the Zack Snyder style from Man of Steel, like the brutality of the battle scenes in Man of Steel. Andy Muschietti can't match that. And he's not going for the gothic style of Tim Burton from the 1989 Batman. Andy Muschietti's doing his own thing, and he'll take little bits and pieces like the Danny Elfman score from the 1989 Batman, or certain kind of dramatic action beats from Man of Steel, and kind of insert them into the Flash. But on the whole, Andy Muschietti made me a believer. Most of my problems with the story come from the screenplay, and the screenplay went through many different rewrites, and it's credited to many different people. But Christina Hodson, who wrote Birds of Prey, she's one of the main screenwriters on it, and I have no way of knowing like what story ingredients she's responsible for. But there's another writer named Joby Harold. But at one point, I saw a list of all the different iterations of the screenplay and how it kept changing. So who the hell knows at this point who deserves credit for the good stuff and the bad stuff? But it seems like Andy Muschietti was doing the best that he could with the material given to him. And recently there was an announcement that Andy Muschietti has been confirmed as the director for the Batman flick, The Brave and the Bold, which will not be the Robert Pattinson Batman, but whoever is going to be the new Batman in the James Gunn kind of relaunch of the DC universe. And I will gladly go see more movies by Andy Muschietti. I mean, he's not turning into my favorite director overnight or anything like that, but he's good enough where I will continue to get excited about whatever he's working on in the future. But that's as far as I can go with that offering specifics. So now we're going into the spoiler section. If you don't want to be spoiled, if you're planning on seeing this movie on Thursday or whatever, bail out now and come back later if you feel so inclined. But I feel like I've been a little harsh in this movie, so let me offer 2 bits of praise, which will show just how much I enjoyed like the last 45 minutes or so. But as I alluded to earlier, if you've been a fan of DC like film and television adaptations at any point in the last 75 years, going from like TV shows in the 50s up to the present day, you're going to have a lot of fun. Like for me, seeing Christopher Reeve and Helen Slater show up looking like absolute gods and goddesses side by side, like they look better in their CGI format than they ever did in real life back in the 80s. But they just looked fucking gorgeous. Like, oh my God, like those are the most attractive superheroes that I have ever fucking seen. And I just got waves of chills because I saw Supergirl in the theater as a kid. I saw Christopher Reeve, and I didn't see Superman the movie in the theater, but I saw Superman 3 and 4 in the theater. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I was born in '76, so Superman and Superman 2, I was just a little bit too young to be dragged along for both of those shows. But I grew up watching those movies on repeat over and over and over again. And if somebody wanted to argue that Christopher Reeve's interpretation of Superman is the best, like, purest, most noble portrayal of a superhero ever caught on screen, I would have absolutely no problem with that. I'll never forget being at a screening in LA in the early 2000s of Superman the movie when it was like a re-release on DVD or something like that. But when it got to the scene where he told Lois that he believes in truth, justice, and the American way, the theater went fucking crazy. Like, you would have thought it was when we were at the goddamn Super Bowl, like thunderous applause, people on their feet. I was like, wow, that's like the most patriotic thing I've ever experienced in a movie theater. So seeing him appear at the end when all these different realities and multiverses and timelines are all crashing together, thumbs up. But the real delight, and I don't know why they spoiled this or why the director just like advertised it on his social media, but seeing Nick Cage with the long hair going up against the giant spider, that was special. And if you don't understand the significance of the giant spider, years ago, Kevin Smith had this DVD called An Evening with Kevin Smith. And I think it was at like Radio City Music Hall, but it was basically just him talking to the audience for a couple of hours and taking questions and just telling tales from the trenches from his early days as a filmmaker. And one of his big early gigs, I think after he directed Chase and Amy, was he was hired for $1 million to write one of the drafts of Man of Steel at that time for director Tim Burton. And the producer, John Peters, who's a complete, total fucking lunatic, he basically demanded that Superman couldn't fly, and he didn't like him being called Man of Steel, and that he didn't like the suit. And at the end of the movie, that Superman had to fight a giant spider. I mean, who knows if that movie would have been a train wreck or not? I have no idea. I have no way of knowing. But that story told by Kevin Smith, it's one of the funniest stories that I've ever heard about just how bananas and strange and unpredictable showbiz can be. So anyway, it was fucking glorious seeing Nicolas Cage with his late 90s mop throwing down with the giant spider. It was like 3 or 4 seconds of just really glorious action. So just, yeah, chef's kiss. It was fucking fantastic. But for me, the best part of the movie by far was when it went into some unexpected emotional terrain where both Flashes realized that the battle is not going well. Supergirl is dead. Batman is dead. So they said, fuck it. Let's go back in time, wind the clock back, and we'll do the battle again, and we'll get everything right, and we'll fix all these problems. But then Batman and Supergirl die again, and like, oh shit! Like, well, we got to go back again. We got to try one more time, and they keep going back and back and back, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And they start kind of like breaking apart the entire universe with all sorts of horrible consequences as reality just kind of comes unglued from all this manipulation of different timelines. But even though we had just met the character of Kara Zor-El, when she gets killed by Zod and his followers, I was like, holy shit, that's some fucking hardcore stuff that we almost never see in superhero movies. Like, occasionally superhero movies will kill off a character like, Iron Man dying at the end of Avengers Endgame. Spoiler alert, happened 4 years ago. If you haven't seen it, don't blame me. You've had enough time. But we never see superheroes die on the battlefield, kicking ass and like dying in heroic fashion with like great self-sacrifice. I was like, wow, like I just met this character and I'm emotionally impacted by her death. And then we see it happen again. I was like, God damn, this movie's getting really fucking hardcore. And of course, Michael Keaton's Batman. I mean, the summer Batman '89 came out, it's the summer I turned 13. I got very emotionally invested in the character, saw the movie a billion times. Same holds true with Batman Returns. I recently revisited both movies. They still hold up so fucking well. I love Michael Keaton's Batman. So to see Michael Keaton's Batman sacrifice himself in heroic fashion several times, I was like, all right, he finally got the send-off that he deserved. He got 2 send-offs that he deserved that are worthy of his portrayal of the character. And it was just a reminder of just how cool comic book movies can be when they lean into just how outlandish they can be. I mean, so much is going on. Like I said, you're seeing all these timelines being manipulated and you're seeing all these iconic characters dying before your eyes. I was like, God damn, this is why I spent so many decades collecting comics. This is why I spent so many decades spending all the dollars that I had every Wednesday when new comics would come out. I was just completely, totally obsessed. But as I was watching this battle scene unfold, I was like, yeah, this is why the Korvac saga for the Avengers was so impactful when we saw many heroes die. Or this is why the Fall of the Mutants was so impactful in the pages of the X-Men when we saw X-Men being crippled and killed and that sort of thing. Superheroes need to die in heroic fashion if you want to have real emotional stakes, if you want it to be grounded. And if someone were to hire me as a consultant to quote-unquote fix the MCU, one of the first things I would do is take all the unlikable and unpopular characters that aren't really connecting or resonating with audiences and give them glorious deaths where suddenly people would reevaluate those characters. Oh my God, like I can't believe you killed him off. I love that character. Like, give him the coolest death scenes possible. And I think you would see Marvel back on top again in no time flat. But this is a video about DC, so let's set aside all that Marvel nonsense. There's one more spoiler that I really enjoyed. I didn't stay until the very end of the credits. I have no idea what like the very last scene was. I thought there was going to be like the ending of the movie, the initial credits, and then like a post-credit stinger. There wasn't one. I was like, I'm not sitting through 10 fucking minutes of this bullshit when it's 1 a.m. But prior to that, George Clooney showed up, and it's like the whole movie is about Barry Allen learning to accept the death of his mother and not manipulating the timeline. But he does one final little thing which allows his father to get let out of prison. But once again, that's a small manipulation of the timeline. So as he's walking out of the courthouse and Bruce Wayne's coming to see him, it's not Batfleck, it's fucking George Clooney. And not a lot of people miss Batman and Robin. I mean, I saw that fucker in the theater, and I was like, what is going on here? Like, it had its moments, but Akiva Goldsman, he wrote a terrible movie, and Joel Schumacher, he just clearly did not care. But I felt like George Clooney deserved a much better movie than what he got. And so it was just hilarious seeing him show up. I mean, George Clooney barely even acts anymore, but to see him get a couple seconds on screen where I was like, you know what? In another universe, what might have been, he could have been a good Batman. The same way Nicolas Cage could have been potentially a decent Superman, or at least as portrayed in this flick. He had all the potential in the world, and because this movie's about multiverses and alternate timelines and possible timelines, it was just interesting showing how even comic book movies that are terrible had the potential to be good if you have different writers, different directors, or just a different interpretation of the material. In any event, long story short, this is a flawed film. This is a long film. It is a glorious film, and it's also a bad film. But I kind of like glorious messes where the movies take a lot of big risks or a lot of big chances or big swings. And a lot of these scenes are so goddamn good that, I mean, some people are going to fucking adore and love this movie, and they're not going to want to hear any criticisms. But I think the reality is it's a giant mixed bag. I have no idea how well it's going to perform. This movie is being released into a very crowded marketplace, and I really have no idea how well it's going to perform. Based on my audience tonight, I would say it's going to have a mixed performance, and everybody keeps saying things like 75 million or 65 million. I mean, if this movie opens up to like 65 or 70 million, that is kind of disastrous because they have put a hell of a lot of money into this flick. But I think also for a lot of people, knowing that the whole DC universe is going to get relaunched or rebranded and just kind of jump-started by James Gunn with his new Superman flick, and that everything's going to kind of get washed aside, I think a lot of people just feel uninvested until that comes. So Aquaman, I doubt the second Aquaman is going to do $1 billion. But here's what I think is going to happen many years down the road. I think Kara Zor-El will have so many fans by the end of this. There'll be a vocal contingent screaming for her return in some form down the road. But whether or not we're going to get a Flash 2, who the hell knows? Warner Brothers seems to have lost all faith in Ezra Miller. No publicity, no interviews, no nothing. So that's going to be an interesting story unto itself in the weeks and months to come. But more on that another day. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because I still need to edit the sucker and get it posted online before I go to bed. Hope you enjoyed my reaction and review. If so, please consider hitting that notification bell to be notified about future videos. But I can't thank you enough for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.